The crimson sunset of Zartax painted the sky in violent shades of purple and amber, casting long shadows across the metallic-scented wasteland that stretched beyond the frontier settlement. Liana pressed her scaled palm against the cracked viewport of her escape pod, watching the alien landscape with a mixture of dread and determination. The orange-scaled draconian diplomat had never imagined her first diplomatic mission would begin with a crash landing on this desolate outpost world, far from the gleaming spires of her homeworld and the careful protocols of interstellar diplomacy. Her reflection stared back at her from the damaged glass. Sharp cheekbones, reptilian features, and those unmistakable orange scales that marked her as one of the Draconian Empire's elite. She had spent years training for this moment, preparing to represent her people in the historic peace negotiations with the Terran Alliance. Instead, she found herself stranded on a world where her appearance would likely inspire fear rather than respect. The pod's emergency systems had been failing for hours, and Liana knew she couldn't remain hidden much longer. The metallic tang in the air suggested the atmosphere was breathable but harsh, and her diplomatic training had taught her that survival often required uncomfortable compromises. With a deep breath that tasted of copper and alien dust, she activated the pod's exit sequence. The taverna that dominated the settlement's main thoroughfare looked like something from humanity's rougher frontier days, all weathered metal and flickering neon signs advertising drinks with names she couldn't pronounce. Liana steeled herself as she approached the entrance, her diplomatic credentials clutched in one clawed hand. The moment she stepped through the door, the raucous conversation died. Every eye in the establishment turned toward her, and she could read the familiar mixture of fear and hostility in their expressions. Humans, Quarians, and other species she didn't immediately recognize all shared the same look of suspicion. The bartender, a grizzled human with cybernetic implants gleaming along his jawline, actually took a step backward. "We don't serve your kind here," he growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to ejecting unwanted customers. "This is a respectable establishment." Liana felt her scales flush darker with embarrassment and anger, but her diplomatic training held firm. "I am Ambassador Liana of the Draconian Diplomatic Corps," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "I require assistance following an emergency landing." The bartender's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Ambassador, you're just another lizard trying to cause trouble. Get out before I call security." The other patrons murmured their agreement, some reaching for weapons that hung openly at their sides. Liana realized with growing alarm that her diplomatic immunity meant nothing here, on this frontier world where interstellar law was more suggestion than requirement. She was about to retreat when a calm voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Marcus." A human male rose from a corner booth, his movement fluid and controlled in a way that suggested military training. He was tall, with dark hair and intelligent gray eyes that assessed the situation with professional calm. Unlike the other patrons, he showed no fear when he looked at Liana, only curiosity and something that might have been concern. "Alex Reeves," he said, extending a hand toward her, with a slight bow that acknowledged her stated rank. "I couldn't help but overhear. You mentioned an emergency landing?" Liana studied him carefully, her diplomatic instincts warring with her desperate need for assistance. "Yes," she said finally. "My escape pod crashed approximately 3 kilometers from here. I require communication access to contact my delegation." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "The storm last night would have interfered with most long-range communications. Why don't you come with me? I have a secure facility where you can rest and we can figure out how to get you back in touch with your people." The offer was unexpected, and Liana found herself searching his face for signs of deception. His expression remained open and genuine, a stark contrast to the continued hostility radiating from the other patrons. The bartender, Marcus, made a sound of disgust. "You're making a mistake. Reeves, these draconians are nothing but trouble. Mark my words." Alex's expression hardened slightly as he turned toward the bartender. "The only trouble I see here is the lack of basic hospitality." He looked back at Liana with an apologetic smile. "Not everyone out here has embraced the concept of interstellar diplomacy." Liana felt a flutter of something she hadn't expected, gratitude mixed with intrigue. This human was defending her, showing her a courtesy that her own diplomatic briefings had suggested might be rare among frontier populations. "You would do this for someone you do not know." "I'd do it for anyone who needed help," Alex replied simply. "Besides, if you're really a diplomat, then you're probably important to people who matter. Seems like the smart play is to keep you safe and help you complete your mission." The pragmatic reasoning reassured Liana more than empty platitudes would have. This Alex understood the political implications of her presence, which suggested intelligence and education beyond what she might have expected from a frontier dweller. She found herself nodding. "I would be grateful for your assistance, Mr. Reeves." Alex's dwelling turned out to be a modest but well-equipped structure on the settlement's outskirts, built into the natural rock formations that dotted the landscape. As they walked, Liana found herself studying her unexpected host. His clothes were practical but well-made, and she noticed the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, the habits of someone accustomed to danger. "You're military," she observed as they approached his door. Alex glanced at her with surprise. "Former corporate security now, mostly. What gave it away?" "The way you move, the way you watch. My people have warriors too. I recognize the signs." He nodded approvingly. "Good eye. Yeah, I did a stint with the Terran Colonial Defense Force before I ended up out here. Sometimes the frontier needs people with those skills." The interior of his home surprised her. She had expected rough frontier accommodations, but instead found herself in a space that was both functional and comfortable. The main room featured sophisticated communication equipment, alongside more mundane furnishings, and the walls displayed art from several different worlds and cultures. "You appreciate alien aesthetics," Liana observed, noting a piece that she recognized as Altarian crystal sculpture. Alex followed her gaze and smiled. "I've traveled quite a bit. You pick up an appreciation for different perspectives when you've seen how beautiful the galaxy can be." He gestured toward a comfortable chair. "Please, sit. Can I get you something to drink? I'm afraid I don't know much about draconian dietary requirements." "Water would be sufficient," Liana replied, settling into the offered chair with careful dignity. "You speak of travel, yet you live on a frontier world. That seems contradictory. Sometimes people end up where they need to be rather than where they plan to be," Alex said, bringing her a glass of clear, clean water. "What about you? This seems like a long way from the draconian core worlds for a diplomatic mission." Liana sipped the water gratefully before answering. "The peace negotiations are too important to conduct only in safe, comfortable locations. Both sides need to demonstrate commitment by meeting in neutral territory." She paused, studying his face. "Though I admit, a crash landing was not part of the original itinerary." Alex's expression grew serious. "Peace negotiations? Between the Draconians and the Terrans? You seem surprised. Has word not reached even the frontier worlds?" "Word reaches everywhere eventually, but details are usually scarce. I knew there were talks, but I didn't realize they were this advanced." He leaned forward slightly. "This is bigger than I thought. If you're part of an official delegation, then your disappearance is going to cause serious problems." Liana felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien climate. "How serious?" "The kind of serious that starts wars instead of preventing them," Alex said grimly. "We need to get you back in contact with your people as soon as possible." Over the next several hours, as Alex worked to repair and boost his communication equipment, Liana found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't expected. Her host proved to be intelligent and well-informed, asking thoughtful questions about draconian culture and sharing observations about the various species he had encountered in his travels. She found herself laughing at his stories, something she hadn't done since beginning her diplomatic training. "You're not what I expected," she admitted, as they shared a simple meal he had prepared. "What did you expect?" "Frontier humans are described in our briefings as rough, uncivilized, potentially hostile to non-human species." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "Some are. You saw that at the taverna. But most people are more complex than their briefings suggest, don't you think?" Liana considered this, thinking of her own people's assumptions about humans. "Perhaps. Our intelligence suggested that Terrans view Draconians as inherently violent, warlike." "Are you? Warlike, I mean?" The question was asked without judgment, genuine curiosity in his tone. Liana found herself giving a more honest answer than she might have in a formal diplomatic setting. "We can be. Our history includes periods of significant conquest and expansion. But we can also be builders, artists, philosophers. The same is true of humans, is it not?" "Absolutely. I think that's what makes these peace talks so important. If our species can move past the worst parts of our histories and focus on what we might build together." He trailed off as his communication equipment suddenly came to life, indicators flashing across multiple displays. Alex moved quickly to the controls, his expression shifting to professional focus. "I'm getting something," he said, adjusting settings with practiced efficiency. "Looks like encrypted transmission, high priority frequency." Liana rose quickly, moving to stand beside him as the signal clarified. A holographic display materialized above the equipment, showing the familiar blue-scaled features of Commander Thorne, her immediate superior in the diplomatic corps. "Ambassador Liana," the image said, relief evident in the commander's voice despite the static, corrupted transmission. "Thank the stars you're alive. We've been searching for your pod since the distress signal cut out." "Commander, I am unharmed and in the care of a local citizen who has provided assistance," Liana replied, glancing at Alex. "However, I require immediate evacuation to continue the mission." Thorne's expression grew grave. "That may not be possible. Ambassador, we have reason to believe your crash was not accidental. Our intelligence indicates there are elements within both governments who oppose the peace negotiations. They may have sabotaged your transport." Liana felt ice form in her stomach. "How certain are you of this intelligence?" "Certain enough that we're treating this as an active threat. You need to remain hidden until we can guarantee your safety. The negotiations cannot proceed if the Terran Alliance believes we've lost our primary diplomat to suspicious circumstances." "How long must I remain hidden?" "Unknown. We're working with Terran intelligence to identify the threat, but it may take days or even weeks. Can your current location provide adequate security?" Liana looked at Alex, who had been listening intently to the conversation. He caught her gaze and nodded once, decisively. "Yes, Commander, I believe it can." "Good. I'm transmitting secure communication protocols. Contact us again in 24 hours for an update. And Ambassador, trust no one except your current host. If there are saboteurs willing to destroy a diplomatic transport, they won't hesitate to eliminate witnesses." The transmission ended, leaving Liana and Alex alone with the implications of what they had just learned. The silence stretched between them until Alex spoke. "So," he said with a wry smile that didn't quite hide his concern, "it looks like you're going to be my guest for longer than either of us planned." Liana studied his face, searching for any sign that this development concerned him. Instead, she saw only resolve and something that might have been protectiveness. "You do not seem disturbed by the prospect of harboring a fugitive diplomat," she observed. "Harboring implies you're running from justice. From what I just heard, you're running from injustice. That's different." Alex began shutting down the communication equipment, his movements efficient and purposeful. Besides, if someone's willing to commit sabotage to prevent peace talks, then keeping you safe is probably the most important work I could be doing right now. The sincerity in his voice surprised her. You truly believe in the importance of these negotiations? Alex paused in his work, turning to meet her gaze directly. I've seen what war between civilizations looks like, Ambassador. I've seen worlds burned and populations scattered. If there's a chance to prevent that from happening again, then yes, I believe in it, absolutely. Something in his tone suggested personal experience with such devastation, and Liana felt a rush of empathy for this human, who had already done so much to help her. In that case, she said formally, I place myself under your protection, Alex Reeves. My life and the success of the peace negotiations may depend on your skill. Then we'd better make sure both survive, Alex replied. But first, we need to make this place more secure. If professional saboteurs are involved, they'll eventually track you here. Over the following days, Alex proved to be a capable and thoughtful protector. He installed additional security measures around his property, established multiple escape routes, and created contingency plans for various threat scenarios. More importantly, from Liana's perspective, he continued to treat her as an equal, rather than a burden or a prize to be protected. They fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Mornings were spent monitoring communications for updates from both their respective governments, afternoons on security preparations, and evenings in conversation that ranged from politics to philosophy to personal history. Liana found herself looking forward to these talks, discovering that Alex was not only intelligent, but possessed a perspective on interstellar relations that often challenged her own assumptions. Do you think it's possible, she asked one evening, as they watched Zartax's binary suns set through the armored viewport Alex had installed. True peace between our peoples? Alex considered the question seriously, as he did most things. I think it's necessary, he said finally. The alternative is too destructive to contemplate, but possible. That depends on whether enough people on both sides want it more than they want the profits of war. Profits of war? Military contracts, weapons manufacturing, territorial expansion. War is profitable for some people, even when it's devastating for most. Those are the people who have the most to lose from peace. Liana nodded slowly. And they would be the ones willing to sabotage diplomatic missions. Exactly, which means they're probably not done trying to stop these negotiations. As if summoned by their conversation, Alex's security sensors suddenly activated, displaying movement patterns around the perimeter of his property. He was at the controls instantly, his casual demeanor replaced by professional alertness. Multiple contacts, he reported grimly. Armed, moving in coordinated patterns. This isn't a random frontier incident. Liana felt her own combat training assert itself, diplomatic protocols giving way to survival instincts. How many? At least 8. Possibly more. They've surrounded the place. Alex was already moving, pulling weapons from concealed storage locations throughout the room. These aren't local troublemakers. This is a professional operation. The saboteurs have found us. Looks that way. But they made one mistake. They don't know what they're walking into. Alex handed her a Terran pulse rifle, noting her familiarity with the weapon. I'm not just some frontier settler, and you're not just a diplomat. We might be outnumbered, but we're not helpless. The first explosion came from the direction of Alex's communication equipment, a targeted strike designed to cut off their ability to call for help. The attackers were clearly professionals, systematically eliminating their options before making their main assault. They want you alive, Alex observed as they took defensive positions. Otherwise, they would have just leveled the building. That may not remain true if I prove difficult to capture, Liana replied, checking her weapon's charge level. Then let's make sure we're very difficult to capture. The battle that followed was intense, but brief. Alex's preparations and the defensive advantages of his position proved their worth, while Liana's combat training complemented his tactical expertise perfectly. They moved together with an instinctive coordination that surprised them both, covering each other's positions and communicating with minimal words. When the attackers finally retreated, leaving 3 of their number behind, Alex and Liana found themselves breathing hard, but victorious. More importantly, they had managed to capture one of the saboteurs alive. "Now we get some answers," Alex said grimly, securing their prisoner. Under interrogation, the captured saboteur revealed the scope of the conspiracy against the peace negotiations. Elements within both the Terran and Draconian military-industrial complexes had formed an alliance to prevent the talks from succeeding, fearing the economic impact of peace on their respective weapons manufacturing sectors. "It's bigger than we thought," Alex said, after they had finished questioning their prisoner. "This isn't just about stopping one set of negotiations. They want to make sure no peace talks ever succeed." "Then we must ensure they fail," Liana replied with quiet determination. "The evidence we have gathered must reach both governments." "Agreed. But getting it there is going to be the challenge. They know where we are now, and they'll be back with reinforcements." As if to emphasize his point, Alex's long-range sensors detected approaching aircraft, military grade, moving fast toward their position. "Time to go," Alex said, activating his emergency protocols. "I've got a backup transport hidden in the caves nearby, but we need to move now." They gathered essential equipment and evidence, abandoning the comfortable refuge that had become something more than just a safe house over the past week. As they made their way through the rocky terrain toward Alex's hidden transport, Liana found herself reflecting on how much had changed since her desperate arrival at the frontier taverna. "Alex," she said as they climbed through a narrow passage between towering stone formations. "Yeah?" "When this is over, when the negotiations succeed and our peoples are at peace." She paused, unsure how to express what she was feeling. "I want you to know that these days have meant something to me. More than just survival." Alex stopped climbing and turned to look at her, his expression serious in the dim light filtering through the rocks above. "They've meant something to me too," he said quietly. "More than I expected when I invited a stranded diplomat to share my home." The moment hung between them, charged with possibilities that neither had dared to voice until now. Then Alex's communication device beeped urgently, breaking the spell. "Transport's ready," he said, though his eyes remained on her face. "We can discuss the future once we've ensured there is one." The hidden transport proved to be a sleek, well-maintained craft that spoke to Alex's resources and planning. As they lifted off from Zartax's surface, leaving the frontier settlement far below, Liana felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty about what came next. "Where are we going?" she asked, as Alex plotted their course. "Neutral Space Station, Gamma 7. It's where the original negotiations were supposed to take place. If we can get there with our evidence, we might be able to salvage this whole situation." The journey to Gamma 7 took 2 days, during which Liana and Alex found themselves confined together in the transport's small crew quarters. The intimacy of shared space, sleeping in adjacent bunks, preparing meals together, working side by side at the navigation console, created an atmosphere that was both comforting and charged with unspoken tension. On the second night, as they drifted through the vast emptiness between star systems, Liana found herself unable to sleep. She rose quietly, intending to check their course calculations, only to find Alex already at the navigation station, staring out at the star field beyond. "Trouble sleeping?" she asked softly. "Just thinking," he replied, not turning around. "About what happens when we reach Gamma 7. About whether the evidence we have will be enough to convince both sides." Liana moved to stand beside him, studying his profile in the soft light of the instrument displays. You're worried about more than the negotiations. I'm worried about what comes after. If we succeed, if peace happens, then you go back to your diplomatic career and I go back to—" He shrugged. "Frontier security work, I suppose." "Is that what you want?" Alex turned to meet her gaze. "What I want and what's practical are usually different things. You're a high-ranking diplomat from one of the galaxy's major powers. I'm a former soldier who ended up on a backwater world. When this crisis is over, we'll both return to our respective lives." Liana felt a sharp pang at his words, recognizing the truth in them while simultaneously rejecting their inevitability. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "the crisis has changed us both. Perhaps we will not be the same people returning to the same lives." Alex studied her face intently. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that some bridges, once built, should not be abandoned simply because they cross unusual distances. The metaphor hung between them, diplomatic language expressing feelings that neither had dared state directly." Alex reached out slowly, his hand covering hers, where it rested on the navigation console. "Liana," he said, her name soft on his lips, "I need you to know that whatever happens with the negotiations, whatever the future holds, these past days with you have been the most meaningful of my life." She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both natural and momentous. "For me as well," she admitted. "I did not expect to find such connection with someone so different from myself." "Maybe that's what makes it special," Alex said, leaning closer. "The differences make the similarities more precious." When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, giving her every opportunity to withdraw. Instead, she leaned into the contact, her free hand rising to touch his face as she kissed him back with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "This complicates everything," Liana whispered. "Everything was already complicated," Alex replied. "This just makes it worth the complication." They spent the rest of the night talking quietly, sharing hopes and fears they had never voiced to anyone else. When dawn came, marked only by the chronometer in the depths of space, they were lying together on Alex's narrow bunk, her head on his shoulder as he traced gentle patterns on the scales of her arm. "We should prepare for arrival," Liana said reluctantly. "We should," Alex agreed, making no move to release her. "The negotiations will be intense. There will be little time for personal concerns." "I know." "And afterward?" "We'll figure out afterward when it comes," Alex said firmly. "Right now, we focus on ensuring there is an afterward." Gamma 7 proved to be a massive, multicultural space station that served as neutral ground for diplomatic meetings between various interstellar powers. Their arrival was met by representatives from both the Terran Alliance and the Draconian Empire, along with station security personnel who escorted them to separate briefing rooms. The next several hours were a blur of debriefings, evidence review, and urgent communications with both governments. The proof of sabotage that Liana and Alex had gathered proved compelling enough to convince both sides to continue the negotiations, though with significantly enhanced security measures. "The talks will resume tomorrow," Commander Thorne informed Liana during their private briefing. "Thanks to your evidence and Mr. Reeves' protection, we have identified and neutralized the sabotage network. The path to peace remains open." "What of Alex?" Liana asked. "His assistance was invaluable. He deserves recognition." Thorne's expression grew thoughtful. "Mr. Reeves has been offered a position with our diplomatic security division. His skills and knowledge of Terran culture could prove very useful in future negotiations." Liana felt a flutter of hope. "He has accepted." "He has asked for time to consider. I suspect his decision may depend on factors beyond career advancement." That evening, as the station prepared for the resumption of formal negotiations, Liana found Alex on one of the observation decks, watching ships arrive and depart through the vast, transparent dome overhead. Commander Thorne tells me you've been offered a position, she said, joining him at the railing. Security chief for the diplomatic corps, Alex confirmed. Good pay. Interesting work. Chance to travel to worlds I've never seen. But, Alex smiled at her perception. But it would mean giving up my independence, becoming part of the very bureaucracy we just fought to protect. Is that so terrible? Not terrible. Just different. He turned to face her fully. The question is whether it's worth it for the chance to continue working with a certain draconian diplomat. Lyanna felt her pulse quicken. That would depend on whether the diplomat in question desired such continued collaboration. And does she? Instead of answering immediately, Lyanna moved closer, until they were standing near enough to touch. She has spent her entire career believing that duty and personal desire were incompatible, she said softly. But recent events have suggested that the greatest duty might sometimes be to follow one's heart, especially when that heart leads toward building bridges rather than walls. Alex's smile was answer enough, but he voiced it anyway. In that case, I think a change of career might be exactly what I need. The formal signing of the peace accords took place 6 months later, in a ceremony that was broadcast throughout both the Terran Alliance and the Draconian Empire. Ambassador Lyanna stood in her formal diplomatic robes, the orange scales of her face gleaming under the ceremonial lights. As she watched representatives of both governments commit to an end to hostilities and the beginning of cooperative expansion into unexplored regions of the galaxy. Beside her, Alex wore the uniform of his new position as Chief of Diplomatic Security, his insignia marking him as one of the few humans to hold such a rank within the Draconian diplomatic service. Their hands were clasped together, a gesture that had become a symbol of the broader alliance their relationship represented. "Do you think it will hold?" Alex asked quietly, as they watched the signing ceremony conclude. "Peace is like any relationship," Lyanna replied, her voice warm with contentment. "It requires constant attention, mutual respect, and the willingness to work through difficulties rather than abandon the effort at the first sign of trouble." "Sounds like you speak from experience." "I do," she said, turning to smile at him. "Recent experience has taught me that the most unlikely partnerships often prove to be the strongest." As the ceremony concluded, and delegates began to mingle in celebration, Alex and Lyanna remained at their observation post, watching the representatives of two former enemy species shake hands and share laughter. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and uncertainties, but also rich with the promise of what could be built when beings of goodwill chose cooperation over conflict. "So," Alex said, his arm settling around her shoulders in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "What's our next assignment?" "The Altarian trade negotiations next month," Lyanna replied, leaning into his warmth. "Then the Centauri Cultural Exchange Program, and after that, establishing the first joint Terran-Draconian colony world. Busy schedule. The price of peace is constant vigilance, and the reward of love is constant effort." She looked up at him, with an expression that held both deep contentment and eager anticipation. "I find myself looking forward to both." As they stood together, watching the birth of a new era of interstellar cooperation, Lyanna reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From her desperate crash landing on Zartax to this triumphant moment of diplomatic success, every step had led toward not just peace between their peoples, but toward a personal connection that transcended the boundaries of species and culture. The future was unwritten, full of possibilities that neither of them could have imagined when they first met in that frontier taverna. But whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, proving that love and understanding could indeed bridge any gap, no matter how vast it might seem. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of the creatures that dwelt beneath them. But in that moment, as Lyanna and Alex stood hand in hand watching the seeds of lasting peace take root, Those distant suns seemed to shine with approval on the unlikely love that had helped reshape the galaxy itself.